Good morning. My name is Katrina Kessler, and I'm the commissioner at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. 1 year ago, the MPCA and other state agencies rolled out Minnesota's PFAS Blueprint, a result of almost 20 years of research, guidance, and regulatory work. We have learned a lot about PFAS, its chemical makeup, and its uses. These forever chemicals are everywhere in our carpets, medicine cabinets, medicines, and in numerous industrial processes and commercial products. We have found PFAS in air emissions, wastewater, groundwater, and soils. There are more than 5,000 PFAS structures and over 9,000 identified chemistries. And new PFAS are invented daily, used in industry and incorporated into commercial products and released into the environment. Minnesota's PFAS Blueprint is grounded in 3 approaches. First, we need to prevent PFAS pollution wherever possible. Second, we need to manage PFAS pollution where prevention is not feasible or pollution has been found. And lastly, we need to clean up contaminated sites. These approaches are not new to state agencies when dealing with pollution, but they do require everyone, state agencies, industries, communities, and the legislature to prioritize strategies, funding, and policies that support additional research, new health guidance, drinking water protection, and more tools for cleanup and prevention. In the last year, we have made significant progress in advancing key initiatives described in the PFAS Blueprint. Last summer, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the DNR announced a $700 million investment in safe and sustainable drinking water for the East Metro because of 3M's contamination. In order to better understand the scope of PFAS contamination in fish, we conducted a large one-time monitoring study of fish tissue concentrations around the state, including in Lake Superior and its tributaries. Thanks to bipartisan support at the legislature, the MPCA has additional funding to address urgent PFAS contamination in our closed landfills. We recently received funding to study how PFAS can move from materials like biosolids and compost into solid soils and surface water. The legislature also funded a PFAS source evaluation and reduction initiative with the goal of identifying and communicating strategies for PFAS sources. The MPCA has laid out several proposals for this year's legislature that build on last year's success, including a proposal for PFAS prevention grants that would put $2 million towards grants to identify PFAS sources and design projects to prevent PFAS pollution. A second proposal would fund a PFAS baseline condition study to determine current levels of PFAS in soil and water and levels associated with local sources of pollution. And a third and final proposal would provide $2.2 million in technical assistance and grants to greater Minnesota communities in their efforts to meet wastewater treatment pollution limits and reduction requirements for PFAS. Next slide. While Minnesota has made progress, we know that more work is needed to keep families and communities safe from PFAS contamination. To parallel the essential work being done to evaluate PFAS sources, the MPCA has developed its PFAS monitoring plan, one of the most comprehensive approaches in the nation to understand PFAS in the environment. The need for a PFAS monitoring plan was called out in the PFAS Blueprint. And toward that end, the MPCA started working with facilities and stakeholders last summer to develop the comprehensive and manageable approach to understand where and how PFAS are entering our water, our air, and our soil. Minnesota is taking lessons from other states in how to best tackle PFAS in our environment, including how to collect data from permitted facilities. While other states like Colorado, California, and Connecticut have taken a more regulatory approach to address PFAS in the environment, Minnesota is using new monitoring data to work with facilities to make better informed decisions about PFAS releases. Better data leads to better results for our communities, businesses, and our environments. Next slide. The MPCA developed the PFAS monitoring plan in order to gain a more comprehensive understanding of which PFAS are being released and in what quantities. The PFAS monitoring plan coordinates all agency program plans under one umbrella. The plan will help us identify sources of PFAS and is a key step in our work to protect families and communities. The work is founded on 3 primary objectives: to gain information needed to develop policies to avoid and minimize PFAS from permitted facilities, to find out if there are urgent needs of PFAS contamination that are currently invisible to us, and to collect data that support PFAS reduction and pollution prevention efforts. At its core, the plan will help us understand the presence and levels of PFAS across many facilities and help us craft a holistic and strategic response. Next slide. The MPCA has identified 379 facilities where monitoring will help us determine where and how PFAS are entering the environment. The monitoring plan focuses on facilities that we believe to have a higher likelihood of PFAS use or release into the environment. The list of facilities is included as an appendix to the monitoring plan. I want to stress that inclusion on the list does not necessarily mean that a facility is releasing PFAS to the air, surface, or groundwater. It only means that they have been identified as a potential emitter and that monitoring is needed to better characterize the situation. The list of facilities includes 8 regional airports in Greater Minnesota: Bemidji, Brainerd, Duluth, International Falls, Hibbing, Rochester, St. Cloud, and Thief River Falls, where having PFAS containing firefighting foam on site in case of a fire is required. There are also 137 manufacturing and industrial facilities included because they fall into a business category that is known to potentially use PFAS. There are 91 wastewater treatment plants included that receive wastewater from manufacturing or other industries in their communities. The list also includes 143 active and operating landfills, recycling facilities, and composting centers. As you may recall, in March 2021, the MPCA announced that nearly 60 closed landfills in 41 counties had PFAS contamination in nearby groundwater. The expansion of PFAS monitoring with the monitoring plan at additional solid waste facilities now covers all landfills in the state. The full list of facilities are available on the MPCA's website, and a link was included in today's news release. I want to again emphasize that the MPCA is committed to working with these facilities to appropriately scope out the monitoring plans. As we move forward, new facilities may be added to the list. Likewise, as we learn more about these facilities, some of the facilities may also come off the monitoring list. Next slide. The PFAS monitoring plan requests that facilities conduct sampling starting later this year and report the data to the MPCA by the end of 2023. The MPCA will work with the facilities to evaluate the results and follow up on action, including understanding if there are source reduction steps that can be taken to lower releases, if there are new or best management practices available to reduce releases, if PFAS containing products can be replaced with PFAS-free alternatives, or if levels are so low at a given facility that no further action is likely needed. The MPCA is expected to release a summary of the findings in 2022. We know protecting communities from PFAS contamination is critical, and I'm grateful that Dan Huff with the Minnesota Department of Health is here now to share their role in continuing its assessment of Minnesota's drinking water.
Thank you, Commissioner. And good morning, everyone. As the Commissioner said, my name is Dan Huff. I'm an Assistant Commissioner with the Minnesota Department of Health. And we at MDH partner extensively with our colleagues at the MPCA, and other agencies. Our role is to make sure that the impacts on human health are mitigated. So the way we do that is we use scientific analysis to study the impacts and set health benchmark values for PFAS. And we also work and collaborate with the many community drinking water systems throughout the state to make sure that everyone in Minnesota has access to clean, safe water. Next slide, please. So the first way we do this is we monitor all of our drinking water systems in the state, so that if you're going to the tap and you're connected to a community drinking water system, you know that we have tested it for a variety of chemicals. And right now we are doing a statewide monitoring assessment of PFAS. To date, we have analyzed or tested for PFAS compounds in 30% of our community water systems. Now that 30%, or about a third of our water systems we have tested, are many of the larger systems in the state. And therefore, 2/3 of Minnesotans who drink from a community water system, we have monitored your water. So that's about 3 million Minnesotans. We've checked the tap water that you're drinking. Of those systems, 67% had a PFAS detection. Currently, only 1% have preliminary results for an exceedance of our health benchmark or our health-based value. Now, you're probably asking, well, what are those 3 systems? Well, those are preliminary results. We need to do some additional monitoring to confirm those. Next slide. In order to make sure that every Minnesotan has access to the information that we have, we are working on an interactive web dashboard. And on this dashboard, we will let you know, and anyone can access, the status of PFAS testing for your system. Have we tested yet? If we have, what are the results? And what is the health guidance based upon those results? And then what steps are we taking, working with the community to address those concerns? Next slide. So as I mentioned, we at MDH also help establish the health-based values, these benchmarks that we use to determine, is a particular level of PFAS safe, or might it have deleterious health impacts? So first of all, we are prioritizing, as we analyze and determine our health-based value, we are prioritizing those PFAS that are possible to be found in our drinking water. And we've already determined that for 6 of the most common PFAS compounds, and we're working on an additional 6. And we are always following the developing science. As you know, this is a rapidly changing and developing field as more research is conducted into PFAS. And we monitor that and stay up to date on the latest research so that our values are based on the latest science. We evaluate the human health risks. What are other pathways that people may be having PFAS? So we don't look at drinking water in a vacuum, but we look at how much do people consume, maybe by eating game or fish, for example. And we are working closely with our sister agencies so that the benchmarks that we establish, they can use in their purposes. Next slide. And all of this work is really based upon the PFAS testing that we do at our state-of-the-art, nationally renowned public health laboratory. The testing that we do in the state on fish and deer and in drinking water, we perform at the public health laboratory. And we are fortunate to have a laboratory that invested early in understanding, researching, and detecting PFAS. And we continue to expand and improve our monitoring at the public health laboratory. Next slide. With that, I turn it back to you, Commissioner.
Yep, thanks, Dan. At this point, we just want to say thank you to everyone, and we're happy to take questions. Dan and I are happy to field questions, as well as we have additional leaders and technical staff from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the Minnesota Department of Health on the line to help with more detail.
Does anyone have any questions? I'm looking here and trying to see if anyone has any hands raised. Christy.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thanks. Just one question. I thought you had mentioned that there would be a summary of the monitoring results released sometime this year, but that these sites actually have until, or they'll be collecting data until the end of next year. Can you talk about what that summary will include and how much information might be available this year?
Yeah, thank you, Christy. And I want to clarify, I misspoke. The monitoring plan work will start this year. So we will be working with the permitted facilities identified in the appendix of the plan to collect the data at the frequency that is appropriate for their facility. And the actual summary of the data won't be available till 2024 because we will be evaluating the data and working with facilities to identify if there are follow-up actions to reduce sources of PFAS.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess maybe just one follow-up would be, can you talk a little bit more about how these sites were identified? You said they have the high potential for releasing PFAS, but it's not a guarantee that they are. Can you just talk about how they were selected?
Certainly. So it was a little bit different for each of the different categories of facilities that are listed in the plan. For example, for the industrial and manufacturing facilities, we looked at codes that are available nationally and have been affiliated with use or discharge of PFAS in other instances. So that's the bulk of the manufacturing and industrial facilities. For the wastewater treatment plants, the list includes what is called facilities that have industrial pre-treatment programs. So if you are a facility that receives waste from an industrial source in your community, you are included in the plan. Similarly, we included all of the landfills that hadn't previously been monitored to look at all landfills in the state, because we know based on our work in the closed landfill program that there is a likelihood that you're going to see PFAS impacts in adjacent to the landfill.
Thank you.
Other questions? Last call for questions. Seeing and hearing none. Again, I want to thank everybody for participating this morning in our media briefing on the monitoring plan and the state's work to continue the hard work on implementing the Minnesota PFAS Blueprint. As I mentioned at the beginning, the recording of this will be posted on the MPCA's YouTube channel. So if anyone needs to revisit any of the statements or information shared, please feel free to visit our YouTube channel here later this morning. And with that, thank you.